Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first lecture of the Department of Studio Arts Summer Lecture Series. I'm Gerald Otten, and I'm director of the Studio Art Exhibition Program. First of all, could I ask you to turn off your electronic devices? Second, you're all invited to the reception for Gina Adams in the Jaffe Friede Gallery following her talk today. And also you're invited to the Strauss Gallery for the Jacob H. Strauss 22 Memorial Exhibition entitled Refuge. I'm happy to introduce to you today our summer artist in residence, Gina Adams. Gina spent her early youth in the San Francisco Bay and then her adolescent and early years in Maine. Gina's formal education includes a BFA from the Maine College of Art and the MFA from the University of Kansas, where she focused on visual art, curatorial practice, and critical theory. Gina's cross-media hybrid studio work includes the reuse of antique quilts, incorporating broken treaties between the United States and Native American tribes, and we're exhibiting a selection of 13 mind-blowing examples in the exhibition in the Jaffe Friede. Her practice includes ceramics, sculpture, painting, performance, printmaking, and drawing. Her work is exhibited extensively throughout the U.S. and resides in many public and private collections. The noted international art critic Lucy Lepard wrote the introduction on her artwork for her Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art exhibition, Its Honor is Here Pledged, which launched her career and her body of work, Broken Treaty Quilts, into a new contemporary art arena in 2015. In 2016, she was SARF, Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, and had Its Honor is Hereby Pledged exhibitions in Boulder, Colorado at Naropa University's White Cube Gallery, where she is on the faculty in visual arts. In the summer of 2017, she presented and exhibited at the AIW conference at Goldsmiths College, University of London, which was followed by an exhibition at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Omaha entitled Monarchs, curated by Risa Puleo. She came to Dartmouth last week following a residency at the Kohler Arts Industry in Wisconsin. Other exhibition venues include Art Basel Miami, the Visual Arts Center of Richmond, Virginia, and the Portland Museum of Art, which was last year, right? Or this year, yeah, like weeks ago. Wow. Upcoming exhibitions include the Museum of Design Atlanta and 516 Arts in Albuquerque. Tomorrow night at 6:30, Gina will present a performance entitled Its Honor is Hereby Pledged, sponsored by the Hopkins Center as part of their Shift series this summer. The performance will take place on the Hopkins Center Plaza, so please join us. And if it rains, I think it's going inside, right? Professor Brenda Guerin, who brought Gina to our attention, was unable to introduce her today, but asked that I read the following paragraph. I first met Gina when we were in a show together, Here Now, work by regional Native American artists, curated by Margaret Jacobs at Ava Gallery and Art Center in Lebanon. We traded pieces, and I chose a piece Gina made with 20 small tourist pieces made of leather and beads embedded in wax, preserved and presented at once like artifacts. Gina is a maker. Her work shows her love of different materials and her great attention to detail. What is always embedded in her work is her ideas and observances, adding her unique and contemporary voice to our Native American history of lives lived and lost. True words. Please join me in welcoming Gina Adams.
Oh, can you all hear me? Great. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. I want to thank everybody here at Dartmouth and the Hopkins Center. I haven't even been here a week, and I've had such a warm welcome. And Miigwech, thank you so much. It's just unbelievable. I feel like I'm really being treated well. I'm sleeping great. I'm eating great. Always wonderful. So thank you so much. I also want to say hello to indigenous people of the land, the Pennacook and the Abenaki. Tomorrow night I'll be reading the Treaty of Portsmouth, 1610, which includes the indigenous people of the land, but was presented by the king. So it's an early treaty that was long forgotten by our US government. So throughout the lecture tonight, I will give evidence of research and my studio practice and how they weave back and forth. If anyone has any questions, I believe there's time. I've saved time for at the end of the lecture, but I definitely want to make sure I answer all of your questions. Bonjour, Hanin, Anishinaabe, Nagdao, Yadojabwemna. Gina Adams, Indigenous, York, Maine, and Boulder County, Colorado. I always love to start with this image. When I was 8 years old, my Ojibwa grandfather took me to a slow-moving stream, and he tossed a pebble in, and he told me to look at the ripples, because the ripples were my life. The choices I made, the things I decided to do, that I could influence things. I could make change. I could influence what I could do in my life. As a young child, I spent time with him, walking through the woods, talking about plants and spirit medicine. My grandfather is of Midwin. I am of Midwin descent from White Earth Reservation in Minnesota. My grandfather was, however, removed at age 8. He was sent to Carlisle School, and I'm going to give you some of that history woven in through my images here. But this has always been part of who I am, as much as sometimes throughout my young adult life I was trying to make sense of it. When I graduated from the Maine College of Art, I went online and I Googled my great-great-grandfather, Wabanekwa, and up popped this image from the Smithsonian Photo Archives. I actually emailed the photo archivist, who I'm now friends with because of my SAR fellowship, and I asked for digital copies of my great-great-grandfather, and they sent me a form and said I had to pay, and I asked did you pay my great-great-grandfather? Of which I didn't get a reply to that. Gina Rappaport, the archivist, she doesn't remember that, but I do. But I just did this thing, I copied and pasted. So I had the image, and I knew in the back of my mind these images were there. But when I found this image through the language, my grandfather taught me the language. So when I found the images through the language, it was really like coming home. All of the features are there, my family is there. So it was pretty powerful. So I started studying the Carlisle School. And I don't know if any of you know about the Carlisle School. I would imagine some of you do. But the Carlisle School was the first assimilation boarding school. I would call it an educational experience that was started by Richard Henry Pratt. And he was in the Civil War, then he was part of the Indian Wars, and the whole idea was to remove the Indian, save the man. That's a pretty famous saying that he coined the term, or that phrase. And so I started looking for images and started studying these locations of boarding schools. And what I found is that this was the first one. The second one was Haskell Indian Nations University, where I have been a professor and taught visual art classes there. But there were actually 340 in this country. The first one opened, which was Carlisle in 1864. The last one to close was in the Seneca, or the Thompson School in Seneca, New York. It closed in 1993. So this is a pretty famous photograph of a student entering and then a student graduating. Well, pretty much immediately, the students would not have their identities of who they came in as. They were changed. Their regalia, the items from home were taken. Their hair would have been shaved, which is a huge, huge, huge. You don't want to cut the hair. The hair is sacred. The hair is family, and that for Carlisle and all the schools not to understand that is part of the heavy burden of the trauma that we have inherited, that I've inherited, that anybody who has boarding school experience has inherited. And I also want to say that most people might not even know they have this history, because that was part of the plan, to assimilate into white culture, to leave everything else behind. My grandfather always said he went to white man training school. And he would laugh, like a cynical laugh, but there was also a pain embedded in it. And I definitely embodied that pain until I started really focusing on my artwork. My grandfather graduated, he went into the Navy. Carlisle changed his name, he changed his name again. He met my grandmother, changed their name again. He was fluid. He could just do whatever he wanted to do, and he wasn't afraid to. He didn't have a birth certificate. He didn't really know which year he was born. He also didn't have a Social Security card. So this is an image from Haskell, and this image is from about I believe it's like 1880s, and this image shows what we think are little girls because they're in dresses, and it says the Haskell babies. Well, when I first went to graduate school at the University of Kansas, I chose it because there was an indigenous community, there were indigenous scholars, I would be able to work with amazing artists and art historians that were indigenous, and that was important to me. It was also important to me because Haskell was the second assimilation boarding school, and it was still there, but it was now a 4-year accredited Native American university. It's the only one in the country that's a 4-year. So I went over to the Cultural Center and I was interested in this image, and I did get a high-res copy, and I met and became friends with a lot of the faculty and administration, and then I started meeting students. And what I found out from one of my students when I taught there was that her grandfather's in this image, and these are little boys. These are little boys that refused to stop speaking their language. So they were forced to wear dresses, and they were called the Haskell babies, like a mascot. So in graduate school, I started gathering photographs that had historical reference to Native American culture, but often gave the viewer a misinterpreted idea of what the culture was and is. And therefore, my belief and my research and my feeling is that if you see too many of these images, you think you have an idea of what Native American, Indian, indigenous culture is today, but it's false. So I started embedding these images underneath a layer of wax, encaustic beeswax that has Damar resin in it, so that it would obscure the image from the viewer, so that you could not stereotype their identity. You might get an idea of their spirit. You might get an idea of an intention, but you're not going to understand. You're not going to be able to look at beadwork or understand what they're wearing and just automatically say, oh yeah, that's a Native American and that's what they look like today. I talk a lot with my students at Naropa University about how to interpret art so that you're not appropriating. Appropriating is something that you should really be careful with any indigenous culture, because anyone who appropriates, like I'm thinking Victoria's Secret with the headdress walking down the runway, or even Ralph Lauren. Those are just two examples. You're really robbing a culture. You're really robbing an identity. You're really just trying to own something that's not yours. So a lot of my work is always talking about this, re-looking at these things and trying to say something. I'm a socio-political artist, which means I want to make change. I'm a contemporary hybrid, which means I'm not going to be placed into one box. I'm Native American descent, I'm Ojibwa and Lakota. I'm also Irish and Lithuanian immigrant. I'm also related to, my last name is Adams. My great-great-grandfather was Samuel Adams. Both of his cousins and his uncle were John and John Quincy Adams. And his father was a Declaration of Independence signer. So my feet are in both camps. I'm responsible for both. So I'm trying to make change. The pot, I started making coil pots in graduate school because I wanted to be connected to Mother Earth and clay. I wanted to go into the studio every day and ask my 3,000-year-old ancestor to help me make a good pot. So I had like 37 or something of those pots and photographs, and it was November and my thesis show was in February. And my advisors were like, okay, you're done. And I thought, no, I'm not. Because what I had been doing was I was learning how to tan hides traditionally in my backyard. And so this is a traditional process. I'm using this, I can't remember what that tubing is called, but my husband actually helped me with this. That's my husband on the other side of me. I tanned a dozen hides traditionally by myself, so brain tanned hides. And at first I was really scared and really nervous because I didn't think I could handle it, but actually now I really like it. And I consider it to be a gift that I was able to relearn a skill that I had lost. So then I decided to do another thesis project instead of the one I had made, and I actually decided, well, what can I do? I want to make a structure, but I don't have a teepee. I don't have a traditional willow dwelling that would be covered in birch bark. Everything that was traditional was not mine. And so I wanted to make a statement. I wanted to create my own event. So I have a backpacking tent. I've been hiking and backpacking and fishing my whole life. So I brought in my very used backpacking tent, and I brought it into my advisors with my smoked and brain tanned hides, and we were quickly flipping this tent around, and then it couldn't be one, it had to be three. And then I took all of those coil pots and I went into the media lab and I smashed them all to record the sound. On my website is the video of this. It was like 6 minutes of sound, 3 minutes of silence, and it would start with this smashing that actually ended up sounding like a gunshot, which was weird, but awesome. The light was dawn, and I wanted the viewer to come in and walk through the space and not understand. But the smell of the hides was present. And it actually traveled. It went to the Bemis, and then it was at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Portland, Maine. It went to the Kemper Museum in Kansas City. So then I graduated, and this was in 2013, and this was a football team in Alabama. And the home team made this for the opposing team. Hey, Indians, get ready to leave in a Trail of Tears round 2. Well, it was all over the news, of course. The students apologized and said they didn't understand. And it was only up for a blip, 24 hours. It should have been up much longer in the media. It should have had much more of a presence, but of course it didn't. Well, I thought, I have an idea. So I had been studying the letterpress font of Indian Wars newspapers, and I took that font into Illustrator and I blew it up to be 4 inches tall. And I made these hand-cut stencils in Mylar. And my first idea was just to create these basketball banners that are part of a video that I actually haven't even done yet with Dylan McLaughlin. It's like his schedule, my schedule. It just hasn't happened. And I also wanted to do this at the KU and with Bill Self, and they wouldn't let me. Yeah, the NCAA, no. They were like, you can't even don't even talk to our players. But then Haskell said, you can come in here. So I will probably end up doing it at Haskell. So I made these 7 banners. On one side, they are what we have as trauma, what we've inherited. And on the other side are oversized silhouettes in calico fabric of peace treaty medallions and the president. So on the back side, that's Jefferson. And it says inherited memory, blood trauma, broken treaties. The last one is kind of tough, but it talks about alcoholism and addiction. We are not just alcoholics. We do not just have addiction issues. We are not just diabetic. We have 7, 8 generations of trauma of forced dietary concerns, limiting what we used to have, no longer able to graze and collect wild medicinals. We were forced to eat white flour, spoiled lard, sugar, bad coffee, and rotten meat. So, and then our children were taken away and taken to boarding schools. So I had finished those 7 banners, and I was at a residency doing those in Key West, Florida, and then I came home to Maine to see my mother. We went to a flea market where we always go, and I found the first antique quilt. And that night I dreamt that I had to cut the letters of an entire broken treaty and place it on that quilt. So that's where the idea came from. The first one I did was Treaty with the Yankton Sioux, because a lot of my friends were Yankton Sioux in Lawrence, Kansas, and I was honoring them and honoring our conversations. And I talked to them about my idea, and they said, go for it. Of course, then it took me 9 months in my little studio room cutting letters, and the whole time I thought, oh my gosh. It was kind of like, is this just a bizarre idea? You know, one letter after letter after letter. But I really liked doing it. It was about 9 months later, I started placing them on the quilt. I knew I had something, you know, my training with my aunt, who's a quilt maker. I'm a 4th generation quilt maker. Training from Maine College of Art and Albers and Itten, color theory with Johnny Ross and Ed Douglas and Honor Mack. Everything I had learned was here, but I was really saying something that could make somebody else think, could make the viewer try to understand what this all meant. But I wanted it to be hard to read. I wanted it to blend in and out and be confusing. These treaties are very, very confusing to read. And they have continued to be ignored. Of course, there was a ruling in 1906, Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock, and the ruling went to the Supreme Court because Lone Wolf was fighting for his people, for his tribe, and because none of the articles in the treaty had been recognized, and the Supreme Court said, well, no, we cannot recognize any treaty, and anybody can just not recognize any treaty. And then from there on out, it was okay that all the articles within any treaty did not have to be recognized. So I posted that first image, and Bruce Hartman from the Nerman messaged me through Facebook and asked me to first give a lecture at the Nerman Museum, which was September of 2014. And then I gave the lecture, and he asked me, how long until you can have 7 done? And I said, March, and he went, ooh. And I said, January, and he goes, perfect. And then I walked away thinking, oh my gosh. And then he gave me a second gallery. So in the second gallery, I wanted to honor the presidents and the peace treaty medals. So I created 7 basketballs in the presidential seals of the peace treaty medals. And I had been gifted a peace treaty medal, and I actually took a tracing of the beads, the brass beads, and they look like bones, which I thought was great. So this is the second gallery. Those are the banners. On the left side is the spirit that once was, and on the right side is the spirit that remains. Why basketball? People ask me why basketball. When I was in graduate school, I wanted to create a power object that could talk about assimilation and racism. If you're a good athlete, you're accepted no matter where you come from. If you're a good athlete from an indigenous community, it means you are healthy. You can bring health and well-being back to your community after you get a college degree and you play in sports, and you can come back and you can be a coach and you're a role model to youth. It's extremely important. Being an artist is the same thing. So this was I had 7 of these to go with the 7 broken treaty quilts, and all of these chiefs belong to those treaties. The treaties they were forced to sign with their X mark. The treaties that they had an interpreter who only spoke English. They accepted the peace treaty medals because they were beautiful. They had a sign of friendship, peace, and honor. Our indigenous peoples had treaties with the land, with the water, with the plant and the spirit medicine, with all of the earth, and with each other. They did not think for 1 minute that the treaties would not be honored. They believed it to be truthful. So this is an install with 4 of the quilts. There were 7. I have a lot of images to show you, so I'm going to start going a little faster. So, okay, so I was a Smithsonian SAR Fellow, so it means Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, and I studied for 10 weeks. For 8 weeks, I was in the Natural History Museum archives working with Candace Green, and I studied photographs of the Choate collection from Carlisle School. I was also looking at indigenous ways of working, indigenous skills, and I also wanted to see beadwork. My first day in the archives, Candace took me through and she was going to show me some Ojibwa or Chippewa labeled beadwork, and she opened a cabinet and I felt this gush of wind almost knock me over. And I asked her to please close the cabinet, that I knew there were things in there I wasn't supposed to see. I also asked her if we could go about it a different way. So she showed me archives on the computer first, and I would choose the ones that I felt like I had permission to see. There would have been many things, if I had not been separated, that I would never have been able to see. And so I still honor that, and it's important to know that. When, like recently I was in the Phoenix airport and there's like a store selling Native American goods and there's a headdress in the window. We shouldn't be able to buy a headdress. It shouldn't be made by a culture that didn't wear headdresses for sale. It should never be for sale. So it's sort of like when I do research, I'm always thinking about, I have a criteria that I'm following. So these are examples of things that I did see. This is actually in the NMAI, and it's just amazing being in the archives. I really love doing research in archives. But I'm looking for things that are of interest to me. This beadwork piece is super beautiful. It's actually really long, and I made a video of it. I'm always looking at birch baskets, like this maple sugaring basket. This is an example of, these are the Choate photos. So John Choate was the first official photographer for Richard Henry Pratt hired him for the Carlisle School. He stayed for the entirety of the Carlisle School. He had a studio at Carlisle. He also had one right in the center of town. And Dickinson College has a lot of his collection right now, but so does the Natural History Museum Photographic Archives. And I was really interested in these because these photographs are different. His Victorian aesthetic is coming through, and the way he has in some of these photographs, he has the students laying hands on each other, or white children laying hands on the indigenous students, and they're a little bit odd. But what I really started paying attention to were these cheesy backdrops and the carpets, and then also connecting back to the beadwork. They started connecting for me visually. So I was looking for family. I was looking for family not only for myself, but for my friends and for my Native American Indian students from Haskell. I was looking for familiar faces. I was looking for answers. They didn't really keep track of names very well, only for the model students that would end up being on like curio cabinet cards for sale in the gift shop. This little boy really struck me. I think I looked at 6 generations of children, and this little boy had tears in his eyes. Now, I would be in the archives every day with loupes, white gloves, looking through, crying. And Candace Green said, we really need tissues. We need tissues to be part of it. But, it sounds like it was tough. It was, but it was also really healing. I took as many photographs as I could. I made notes of every single number of the photograph for the archival record so that I could return to them. And I'm actually going to start another pretty large project using a few of those images. So this is an example of a parent that would have come in. He would have been coming in for a delegation in Washington, D.C., and he would have come to Carlisle, and Choate used this as a photographic opportunity. The carpet, the pattern on the carpet is super important now in my work. And they would label them and they would sell them in the gift shop. They wouldn't always be able to see their children. And sometimes the children may have not been there. My grandfather, when he was finally taken to Carlisle, thought he was going to see his older sister and his brother, but they had already died. His brother had died running away. He got hit by a train, and his sister died of influenza. A lot of things from the regalia these students were wearing is actually in collection at Dickinson University. And there's some pieces that Richard Henry Pratt gave to the Natural History Museum of the Smithsonian. So those are still, they're still present. Not all in one place. There's a lot of talk that it should be returned and repatriated, and I believe a lot of these things are starting to be returned. So when I was in DC, it was May of 2016, I had brought a cutting kit with me, and I didn't know what I was going to work on. I hadn't decided because I had been teaching at Naropa University and at CU Boulder. I was teaching 5 classes. I couldn't say no, but it was a good way to actually be in Boulder. I got to know a lot of students and a lot of people that way. It was good. So I brought in the cutting kit and I did my research on the treaty, and something just in my mind said, maybe you should do your own treaty from your own reservation. And I actually pulled it up, and there was my great-great-grandfather, Wabanekwa's X-mark. And there was my great-great-uncle, Mishugijaguk. And I thought, wow. And then I looked at the date. 149 years earlier, my great-great-grandfather and great-great-uncle were in DC for 2 months, overlapping the months I was there, negotiating with the US government for the people. So I don't think I said, I work on antique quilts, always antique quilts. I want them to be about 100 years old. They can be torn, they can have stains. I want them to have a certain wear to them. The back of the quilt is always the beginning of the treaty, and the front of the quilt is the ending of the treaty. I choose language from the treaty that I think will read really well on the quilt. I'm not able to use the whole entire treaty because there's just too much. Some of these are like 12 pages long. I will have available in the gallery the link to the website if you want to do your own research on treaties. I think it's really important. And I'm hoping to print some of the treaties out so that the viewer can read them. Calico fabric also is very important because it was the first milled commodity made in the United States for export and sale to other countries. And the first mill was in Dover, New Hampshire, about 20 minutes from where I grew up in York, Maine, where my family still is. I didn't know it until I started doing that research at the University of Kansas. And so that was kind of cool. But so calico fabric is quilt making fabric. It was also given, it's stipulated in the treaties that the United States government will give calico fabric as part of the gifts or the commodities they'll give every year. And it's a very beautiful fabric and highly sought after. The colors are absolutely beautiful. So I was actually at the SARF, and I was in week 5, and I was running out of the Choate photos. I was also trying to see Gertrude Casebeer's photographs of the Buffalo Bill Cody performers from New York City, but I was running into that was in my original proposal, but I wasn't able to see them because the archivist was not around, medical issues. I did end up seeing them. They ended up not being as great as I thought they were going to be. But I was on my way to Suitland, Maryland, to the archives, and I texted Gina, the photo archivist, and I said, by any chance, would you have anything for Wabanekwa, my great-great-grandfather from White Earth? She texted me back like 15 minutes later, and she said she had 400 or more photographs. So this is an image. So my great-great-grandfather and his siblings, who several of them were chiefs. They were chiefs of the United States government, called them the Chippewa of the Mississippi. We had migratory lands that went St. Lawrence Seaway through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi. And we migrated in that whole territory for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We had originally started on the East Coast, so Maine is not, it's actually homeland. And the coast of Maine, like where Indian Island is homeland. Like my people were once there. So they were now, in 1864 to 67, they were now all between the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes, between the United States and Canada. And the United States government gave the chiefs the choice of choosing which of the 5 reservations between Minnesota and Wisconsin and North Dakota they wanted to go to. And Wabanekwa chose White Earth, and this is his cabin. This is one of the cabins, or maybe the only cabin, that was built on the reservation. So everybody's sitting in here. These are my family. And this is Wabanekwa when he was younger than the photograph I initially found. And this is an uncle, and this is my great-grandmother. This is Aniqua. When my mother saw this, she said, that looks like me when I was a little girl and my father. So there were all these connections happening. I was taking camera images, texting them to my family. It was pretty powerful. This is Maganawash, another brother. This is Mishagijaguk in his cabin. This is Mishagijaguk. He was a Mitawan elder. And this is him showing what it meant to be a Mitawan. One thing I found from having access to these images, which really blew me away, you can see there's a peace treaty medal, was that Francis Densmore, the cultural anthropologist, had spent 10 years with my people. There are writings and journals and bulletins in the Smithsonian, but she was not published at the time because she was a woman. She was not published because the only job that the early Smithsonian felt she could do was to transcribe the writings of men. So she did do that, but she kept very careful journals, which are all in their archives, which is amazing and amazing to have. So I thought, oh my gosh, I had read her writings in graduate school, what I could find. I just thought, oh my gosh, my people, they were rock stars. Like, how amazing. And to just actually also, my grandfather always told me to look at the back of the hands and the eyes and the forehead. He said to pay attention to that, to not look anywhere else. And I do see so many similarities, but I felt it in my heart immediately. And these ancestors connected into my heart and my soul, and I really wanted to honor them. So with each body of work, I have to choose what I want to say, what body of work will this become, what medium will I use that will best say what I'm trying to say. They were not going to be embedded under wax. They needed to be honored. They needed to be presented to the world. And this reconnection needed to be documented. This ancestor is awesome. It says on the back, so it says file print across the front. And I've actually purposefully asked for a high-res scan of that to keep that. On the back of the photograph, over the years, people have come in and made notes because they know who this ancestor is. And it says renegade on the back. wanted by the US government, not completely trusted by his own people because he refused to conform. He refused to conform to the old ways, or to the new ways. He wanted to keep the old ways, so he continued to do his migration. He was doing it mostly on his own. He's Mishogijigut's son, and I think he's just completely awesome. So again, my great-great-grandfather Wabanekwa. And this was a delegation photo, so this was taken when he was in Washington, D.C., negotiating the rights for his people. And then this is another ancestor. I don't know his name, but I think his thumb is shot off. I've been trying to find more photographs. He's wearing this vest that has these beautiful mirror medallions, and I'm actually doing research on the mirror medallions now. And, you know, he's carrying a pistol, and I think he just has wonderful presence. I need to go to the Minnesota Historical Society and start doing research in those archives to start connecting more information. And then this is John Ballou. So my grandfather told me to watch out for him. He was a trapper turned Indian agent. He was in charge of the land. So he was in charge of the land. He's really creepy, right? You still want to watch out for him. Yeah. And then this image, this is one of the first little boys I watched grow up in the first group of students at Carlisle. This is Wabanekwa's son, who graduated from Carlisle, became a missionary, became an Indian agent, and a minister. And he was responsible for taking the children from White Earth to Carlisle. He is responsible for taking my grandfather to Carlisle. I knew his name. My grandfather had told me his name, but I didn't know the connection. I didn't understand the connection of being family. So of course he trusted that he was going to be okay. He was with family. So I have this, you know, it's a turbulent history, and I have to take ownership of it. And I feel like it's my job to educate people that this happened, but it's not just about me. It's about millions of people who maybe don't know this history. It's about the nations in this country who are still being disrespected, who need their history to be told and need to be respected, and the treaties need to be honored. And we need to just understand that they are the first indigenous people of the land. The land we're standing on is indigenous. So this is the NMAI. In the NMAI, I wanted to see pieces in the collection that were Ojibwa, that were from the Great Lakes region, and that might have something connected to ceremony that might have been connected to my people. So I was given permission to see a lot of objects, some of which are not here because I should not be showing them to people. But I was given permission to see objects, and I just really wanted to be with them. It wasn't about photographing them to share them with others. It was about being with them for the experience of being with them. And it was just, in some instances, it was singing to them and speaking the language to them and trying to understand something about who the maker was. And I have done encaustic for a very long time, and this is beeswax with resin. So the connection to my craft is still, it's there in my ancestral connection. I'm always looking for pieces like this. On one side it said OBR, and the other side it said bro, and it was a little boy's vest. And it just it was really, really beautiful and smoke tan hide. It just had a wonderful personality. So this is me in my studio, and I want to show you this because that's one of the quilts, Royal Proclamation of Canada. That's my placing the letters on that quilt. That's my house in the background, which we're constantly renovating and never gets done because the artwork takes precedent. The living room is the studio. Living rooms are a waste of space. and that's hand cutting the letters. People have asked me, why don't you laser cut them? Like, no way. This is about handwork. It's also very meditative. I really like doing it. But it has to be work made by hand. My ancestors, the people in my family today, they're quill workers, bead workers, basket makers, traditional skills. I choose purposefully not to create those, to honor them and their skill. Also, if I were to do that work, I'd be taking something away, and I don't want to take anything away. So I choose to do something different. I always work with the calico fabric. It's both used, it's repurposed. I cut apart shirts and clothing. And about 48 to 98 colors, fabrics in each cutting kit. So then I started doing these performances where I'm wearing a broken treaty quilt. That's the Fort Laramie 1867. And that's the first Treaty of Six Nations quilt I did. I'm actually doing multiples of the Six Nations because I've been doing research on Benjamin Franklin. He took the Treaty of Six Nations to all of the colonies and told every group of Six Nations that this is your treaty, even though he was sort of like reusing and repurposing. So now I'm doing multiples to just be able to have that conversation that is actually our history that happened. This is one that's in the show. This is a treaty from the king. So some of the early ones, this is the front. I found this quilt in the Adirondacks, and it's all really, really tiny pieces. It's in the exhibit. And this is a Cherokee treaty. So there's 13 in the show. I wanted to represent some of the 13 colonies, but I also want to represent the people who were forcibly moved. The creators of this country, of our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, this was their idea. It was their idea, the Indian Removal Act, the Dawes Act, the treaties, the reservations. It was all their idea. So yes, they were great men, but they also made some mistakes. They also forcibly changed a lot of people's lives. And history repeats itself. If you don't make change, it will continue, and it is continuing now. So I wanted to talk about these beadwork pieces. They're very geometric, and they were marked with nations' identities that seemed to just cross over and didn't seem to fit. Kept asking Candace Green, are these mislabeled? They are very geometric. This is not Northern Woodland, Ojibwe, Chippewa. And then she said to me one day that it was perhaps an understanding or a thought that these were created by students in boarding schools who were following the patterns of the carpet. That they were allowed or given the skill of beadwork, but they didn't have any of the older patterns. So they were creating new patterns from the patterns in the carpet. So after my first 8-week fellowship, I went back to my studio with my ancestor images, and I created this digital beadwork ancestor prisms. And I was looking at the patterns in the carpet and the colors in the beadwork. And I created these just beautiful backgrounds to honor my ancestors. So I'm constantly, when I'm in archives, I'm always looking for peace treaty medals. This is a set I saw recently at the Buffalo Bill Cody Museum in Cody, Wyoming. Just like 2 weeks ago, I saw these. And they're pretty early. And then this is one I saw at the Pick Museum in DeKalb at Northern Illinois University in February. And this was really wonderful because these are like bare knuckle bones. So something is happening with that. I had thought I might do it at my Kohler residency, but I quickly realized I was trying to do too much in a short amount of time, so I had to completely focus. But there it is in its entirety. It was really lovely, really had presence, and the staining and the wear on the bones, and I just felt, it feels like the patina is pretty wonderful. So I was a Kohler Arts Industry resident fellow, and I wanted to learn, my idea was to do materials research. I wanted to learn how to make multiple piece, very complex molds. I had taken a mold making class at the Maine College of Art, but mostly I did two-part molds. Many different kinds of molds, from silicone to plaster. I learned quite a bit there, but I wanted to learn how to make 7 to 10 to 20 piece molds. So these are spindles from calico mills, and the originals were wood. So I made molds of them and just made 3 or 4. I poured slip into these molds 3 or 4 times, and then just glazed them white, because the white is like available at Kohler. It comes out of like, it's like Willy Wonka's factory there. The slip comes out of pipes, the glaze comes out of pipes, and it's automatically connected to a sprayer, automatically connected to a master craftsman. He'll do it for you if you're nice. And of course, time is limited. You're working 12, 14-hour days. The temperature was between 95 and 115 with 87% humidity was the low side. And I felt like I was melting. But I figured out what to do, like how to dress better. You know, my backpacking skills came into it, and yoga clothes. But some of these were 8-part molds. And then I wanted to make more basketball molds because I want to do an oversized peace treaty medallion, where the peace treaty medallion is like 3 feet across. And I want the basketballs to be beads. So I want these to be oversized sculpture. I thought I was going to do this in this residency, but no. Again, I had to be completely humble and realize you do not have enough time. And then we sculpted. I had one of my best friends, Jamie Bates Sloan, who I met at the University of Kansas. She's a ceramic figurative artist. She came in and we sculpted from the photographs of my ancestors. We sculpted these 5 in their likeness. And we bisque fired these, and they look kind of shiny because I had to spray polyurethane on them so I could make molds of them. And I didn't actually put any of the mold making process, but I'm going to post it on my website. They were like 20-part molds. And I ended up only finishing 3. And now I have shipped everything to Mudshark Studios, where I'm going to work with Brett Binford to actually take the next year flying back and forth to really get this perfect. Because the molds of the ancestor faces, they were concerned at Kohler that this was going to be the challenging part. Well, this wasn't that bad. I figured it out. We had really good results. I have 3 of them in my studio that were just shipped here. And then we also I wanted to make small wearable medallions. So these medallions are about the same size as the medallion that I'm wearing. And there's one representing all my ancestors. So around on the base of these molds, or actually on the slip cast pieces, because these are the originals. These are from the molds. I just started making decals of my broken treaty quilts. So they'll be surrounded, like just around here, they'll be surrounded with broken treaty quilt of the Chippewa 1867 treaty. And I didn't want any glaze on their faces. I wanted their likeness to be in clay and bisque fired, but not glazed. So then this is one of the larger ones. I made these molds that were huge and weigh 500 pounds. I'm like, why do I always do the tough thing first? Well, that's just who I am. But they cracked, and they cracked in different places. I have 3 upstairs that I'm hoping Margaret Jacobs and I can figure out a way to maybe make a welded metal frame just to see if I can keep them together. But I need to work on why that's happening. So this is Wabanekwa, and I love what happened with the glaze. And this will have broken treaty quilt decal fired around them. But this happened on this one. I fired a basketball as a test, a half of a basketball, and that worked out great, but the medallion cracked here. The Kohler kiln is a football field long, runs 24 hours a day, fires to cone 10, ramps up really hot, stays really hot, and then gets really cool very fast. I'm thinking I'm probably going to be able to control this at a cone 06, not cone 10. So I have a lot of work to do. This is Annequa, my great-grandmother. So this is amazing because the medallion cracked, but her face did not, which the master craftsman at Kohler said that she was the perfect woman in a broken world. And they kept begging me not to throw it in the cull, which is the trash, which really means that the Kohler employers are picking through trying to get the artist work out of it, which I love that too, but I wasn't about to put these anywhere, but I need to figure it out. I don't know if it is actually, I'm hoping it's shipped to me okay. I haven't had the strength to open the box yet, but Margaret's coming on Saturday to help me or just be there. And Alana will be there too. So this is another Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This is a second one I just finished. I'm going to do multiples of this one too, to be like a wall. But this one is now at 516 Arts in New Mexico, and I thought they were going to get the one that was coming back from the Bemis Monarch show, but right when the Monarch show was closing in January, I found out that it's traveling. The show is going to be traveling for like 2.5 years. So I created a new one for New Mexico. So during the day, 8 to 12 hours a day, I was in the Kohler factory sweating and filthy, but learning a lot. I'm still like thinking about everything that I've gained. It's kind of amazing. And then at night and in the morning, I would get up at 4 a.m. to sew the quilts for this exhibition because I had to make 6 new ones because of the traveling. That's a detail. And this quilt here is actually a pre-Civil War quilt. And I collected this one last November in Longmont, Colorado, where I live at an antique fair with my mother. And it had a label hand-stitched on the back that had been in a Maine historical museum in an exhibition, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. So it ended up in my town, and I bought it, and I did this to it. The people I buy these quilts from now, they know me, and some of them are calling me, telling me they have things, or they'll just text me images. But it's, you know, I really want to find beautiful examples. So this was the end of the third quilt I had made, and I ended with the word home. I always like to end with this slide because, you know, home to people who have once Indigenous people like myself, who were once migratory people within a community of support, who were then removed. We're always looking for home. Like, where is home? Well, home are where my people are. Home are where my friends are. Home can be just about anywhere where the plants and the animals and the artwork and the medicine are speaking to me. So, Gigawabamin Minawa Nwigewch. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again.
Can you get the lights?
Yeah. I'm going to keep this on so you can hear me, but I'm really nervous I'll start having another conversation that embarrasses me. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I was wondering if you could clarify the 10 pieces.
Sure.
Were they made from the hides that you tanned?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so they were partially the hides that I tanned because it went from 1/10 to 3/10, and I had like 6 weeks. And so I started calling all brain tanned hide makers that I knew and asking for them to send me hides. I had to write a grant. PEO organization was really great. They met with me like that night, and I applied for a grant, and that funded all of the quilts. Sierra Designs actually gave me a 50% discount, which really gave me a tent for free. So they were Sierra Designs backpacking tents, and then I stretched and hand stitched the hides onto it, onto the bottom and onto the top. And then inside was maple staffs to hold them up. And there was this whole interior structure too that my husband, who became an engineer, who was cursing me for a couple of weeks. And our front yard looked like a beaver dam with all the broken pieces. It was awesome. But now we have a system. Yeah, and it just goes up like a backpacking tent and flips over and the pieces go in and it goes together. But yeah, so I tanned 11 of the hides. And then every single one of the 3 tents, the hides were divided. So they were all in there. Yeah.
Yes. I really liked what you had to say about appropriation, and I was wondering how you felt about Dana Schitz's painting of Emmett Till in the 2017 Whitney Biennial.
Yeah, that was tough. She's an amazing painter. That brought up a really appropriate conversation.
Could you repeat the question? Did everybody hear the question?
Oh,
Is that me?
I'm terrible at repeating questions.
Okay,
So about Dana Schultz's
yeah.
Emmett Till painting and her appropriation of what she chose to paint
Okay.
in the Whitney Biennial. I think the conversation really needed to happen on a national scale. It was really important. She should have really thought about the community that was affecting before doing it. It's also a curatorial responsibility, however. Sometimes I wonder if museums on a national scale want that kind of discourse because it gives them more attention, sells more tickets. It's Buffalo Bill Cody experiment all over again. Yeah. I don't agree with her choice. I don't agree with the museum's choice. It traveled, somebody purchased it. I think she is a good artist. I think she's a very talented painter. I just think she made a misjudgment. You can't actually be the only lone judge, however. We have to choose, we have to become a collective, a social network of support. She should have had a social network of support where she could have asked, do you think this is okay? If the answer was no, it was no. She probably did not have that support. And the curators probably saw this in her studio. Could have been back in a corner and they could have pulled it out and chosen to exhibit it. So I think the responsibility lies on many, many, many different places.
Yes.
Well, first, I've really enjoyed your talk, so thank you so much for being so generous about your art process. While you're at Dartmouth, can I ask if you want to share what you're working on or researching or any special focus for you here?
Right, yeah, absolutely. So I have broken treaty quilts with me. If anybody wants to come to my studio and help me cut letters, you are all welcome.
You can blitz artist in resident.
Yes.
I forgot to mention.
Please. I'm hoping to, one of the things I really want to do is have CNC letters cut of the stencils. Because I hand cut these Mylar flimsy stencils and my letter cutters, including my son, really complain. I can handle it, but it's my work. But I'm actually hoping to make some thicker ones that are like the thickness of a thin puzzle piece or something. Another thing, I'm hoping to finish a scribe blanket chest I started in 2009, and it's in scribe encaustic from this body of work that I started after my first language immersion when A Midwin elder steamed open a birch bark scroll for me, and after the language immersion, I ran back to my studio, which was then in Rollinsford, New Hampshire, because I was still living in southern Maine. And I started doing these scribe etched pieces to honor the birch bark and to honor Midwin medicine, but plant spirit medicine. And they're like scratchings or etchings. They're my copper plate from my printmaking undergrad. So I had made this blanket chest. Now this was way before the broken treaty quilts. And it went to the University of Kansas with me. I thought I would finish it in grad school. I didn't. And then it was installed in the chair of the visual art department's office for 5 or 6 years. And Chris Burke, who's one of my ceramic assistants from the University of Kansas, drove it up to me while I was at Kohler, and it shipped here, and I'm gonna finish it here. And I'm gonna line it with broken treaty quilt pieces. I know, right? It's come right back. And then I wanna do a larger photographic project that is just the beginning of a project, so I don't expect to finish it here, of the images from the children on the Carlisle lawn. I have this idea about doing a national ask for, an ask for like head and shoulders, like selfies from Indigenous people, people who have connection of boarding schools in their history. And I wanna overlap the photos of the children with the contemporary people and actually name who they are and what their connection is. And I see this as being like giant wall murals and maybe even billboards. This is going to be another big project. Alana, did I miss anything? I have a lot of little things happening, but the broken treaty quilts. Alana Tapaha is my assistant here. She's only got a couple weeks left.
You can speak into the microphone.
Okay, so yeah, so we have a few things. I have about 10 broken treaty quilts I'm hoping to work on. I don't know, I always overdo it. But they're there, and if I get them finished, great. If not, then we'll see. But yeah, I plan on working every day in the studio, maybe a half day on Sunday. Just because I want to sleep in and drink lots of tea. Yes?
I was wondering what your interest and/or relationship is to art from other Indigenous peoples.
Well, it's beautiful. It honors their culture and their identity of who they are. I respect it from a distance. I honor it, and especially the contemporary makers who are still like Nicholas Galanin. Did I say that right? I always wonder if I say his name right. He's really amazing. There's a lot of amazing contemporary artists who are Native American Indigenous who are making amazing work right now. Merritt Johnson is another one that works with Nicholas, they're partners. And one thing I teach, in which I like to talk about a little bit, is I teach my students how to not appropriate anything by taking them to museums and actually going in and asking the objects if they should even take a photograph. If you get a no in your heart, it's a no. And then we go back to the studio and I ask them if they got a yes to interpret it from their own experience and their own history. And they're not allowed to use any parts or any of the materials in the object. They have to change it. I think it's pretty powerful. When I talked about making a pot, a coil pot of my 3,000-year-old ancestor, I was trying to not replicate any other contemporary or Indigenous Native American maker. I was trying to have something that would be honest in my own. I hope that answered your question. Yeah. Yes.
The treaties themselves, did you actually obtain copies of those, and where are those, how do you access them?
So there's 2 databases I use all the time. There's also a couple books by Francis Paul Pruka, who put together this great, huge book of all the treaties in like I think it's 1908. That book is really hard to find. The University of Oklahoma Libraries has them all online. They have a huge database. I'm going to have that available in the gallery with my exhibition so that anybody can look it up. Yale University also has a database. Sometimes the obscure ones, like the Treaty of Portsmouth, was kind of hard to find, so I had to like ask scholars, do a little bit more research to find it. But pretty much if you Google a landscape and a treaty of the area, you're going to find the treaty that's connected to the area. I always try to, in every exhibition, I always try to create a treaty of the land. Okay. They were handwritten at the time. Yes. In English. Yeah. So I can have one more question. Yes.
What process do you go through in like deciding which broken treaties to stitch onto a quilt and what sections?
It has a lot to do with where I'm asked to exhibit and how much time I have. So when I was coming here, I wanted to make at least 6 or 7 that were from the landscape around us. Now remember, when these treaties were formed, Massachusetts was part of Maine. New Hampshire was part of Maine. I mean, there was a lot of overlapping territory. There's a lot of overlapping territory in these treaties in the land masses anyways. So I'm thinking about where am I exhibiting. I want to honor the people of the land. I want to create their broken treaty quilt. So that's how I choose. That's how I choose. And then it depends on how many as well. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. So I hope you can all come down to the reception and the Jaffrey Freedy. Sorry, I've only been here since Wednesday. I'm like, where am I again? Thank you so much. Thanks.